In this episode of the Brand in Demand show, we have Todd Clauser here. If you've watched any of Todd's videos or his content in general, he will edutain the heck out of you in one piece of content or video, and then like the next one he's turning around. He's made you laugh, he's made you smile, and then he's turning around the very next post, and he's got you deep thinking on some content like methodologies and things like that. So I thought bringing him on here would be an absolute freaking phenomenal show, and I just think it's going to bring a ton of value to you guys. So Todd, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, man.
In your LinkedIn profile, your headline says, "The worst marketer of all time." Explain to us why you chose that for someone that I would consider really great at marketing.
Okay, so the backstory of this was, as you know from like my content, I like to build characters, right? And I built a character called the worst marketer in the world, and it was based on like the old Dos Equis commercials where it was like the most interesting man in the world. That's where it originally came from, and the reason I created that series was because, like, I'm sure you've experienced this, like you have burnout. A lot of my content is like there's a story around it. It takes me a little bit to create it, so like I'm constantly thinking. I was a little burnout, and I wanted something that I could put out consistently with as little effort as possible. And that's what became the worst marketer in the world. But then, like, as that started to pick up and like people started to connect with that series and character, I put it in my headline because like people knew me for that. But then, like, as people would comment and be like, haha, like that's fun. And I get these a lot. Like, I'm not going to say I get them every day, but I probably get like, I don't know, like 4 or 5, 6 people a month, like specifically like reaching out. Like, I love your headline. And I kind of realized, like, as I kept getting these like, haha, that's so funny, that like, that is actually a representation of like how I came into marketing, and like for a long time how I felt as a marketer in this world. Because like my background, I did YouTube full time for 10 years. That's my background. When everyone was talking about like marketing automation and like all these other like, you know, hot marketing things at the time, like I never got into any of that. I was always like, how do I create content that resonates with my audience? We were in a sponsorship slash influencer slash whatever you want to call it model for 10 years. And it was like, my goal was to create fans and build my audience so I could get sponsorships. And in that sense, like when I would talk to a real air quotes marketer, like, yeah, I felt like I was like the worst marketer in the world. Cause like, I didn't know any, like, I couldn't tell you how to go through HubSpot or Salesforce or do any of this reporting. Like, no idea. But
I think that's why we probably like we mesh so well, because I came from the same place. Like I came from B2B sales. So I was like, the only thing I thought about was the customer and how they think about things and what their problems are. And I came into the marketing world and I was like, what are you guys doing with these dumb ebooks and these trying to get people this and do and I'm like, the corporate content, I'm like, how does that going to resonate with people? And they're like, what do you mean it's marketing? So I love that, man. And I think if you're listening now, like Todd, like you're a great example of just thinking outside the box. Like, you know, he could have put marketer and, you know, done what everyone else does, B2B marketer, but instead he's got this story he's telling, he's creating characters, and he's getting your attention by saying the worst marketer in the world. You can't help but read that line and go, what? Is he really the worst marketer? Like, is he really freaking good? Is he so good that he just reverse psychology at us? Like, it's good, man. It's good. So if you're listening right now, like the audience members are mostly business owners, entrepreneurs, things like that, trying to grow their company through content, trying to build trust through video content. You know, you might be thinking that content builds brand awareness and the purpose of content is to get attention and to get our name out there. But I like how, Todd, you break this down very nicely, where you say the purpose of your content is not brand awareness or attention or just to get your name out there. What is the purpose of content?
Well, before I answer that question, because the question is everybody's favorite answer, which is it depends. But that answer came what you're describing, that came from me talking to ballpark like 150 people back in February, like on content and specifically getting started on TikTok. And one of my first questions is, okay, like what's the purpose of your content? Why do you want to create? And in my head, like that's a very simple answer. Like, and it's going to be different for everybody, but every single one of those calls, 98% of them, it was like deer in headlights. When I asked this, like to me, a very casual question, like, okay,
Right.
like you reached out so we could talk about getting on TikTok. Why do you want to, like, what's the purpose? And then it's like, what? And then like there'd be like 5 or 6 seconds, and then it'd be like one of two answers. One is brand awareness, and two is get inbound demo requests. And when I hear that, my initial response is like, one, that's not a purpose, that's a side effect. Like that's
Outcome.
the outcome of your purpose being successful.
Right.
So like to me, the way you break down content purpose is one of three things. And there, you can probably get outside of this, like if you really challenged me, but in a B2B sense, this is how I look at it. Number one is you're creating what I call top-down strategic narrative content. So this type of content is targeted very specifically at like the strategic decision makers within your target organization. And the goal of that, or the purpose of that, is to achieve a mindset shift in that person or group of people, so they push that narrative down. So that's purpose number one. Now, purpose number two, which I call middle out implementation, is let's say you achieve that and they have this mindset shift. The people who have to implement that strategy, whatever it is that you did up there, by listening to that type of content, they will not be able to implement it. It's strategic, it's theory, it's like high level thinking. There's no implementation whatsoever. So that's middle out implementation, is like the how-to content. Very tactical. How do I do X? Y is going to be the result. So that's, in my head, purpose number two. Purpose number three is what I call bottom-up evangelism. So think of like what we were just talking about in the beginning of this episode with like the edutainment type of content. This can also be like straight entertainment that is like brand building exercises, can be kind of grouped into that as well. But the goal of bottom-up evangelism is to create content that resonates with the end user of your product. So like, for instance, if your end user is an SDR, a lot of companies are selling to VPs of sales because that's who's going to buy the product, and they completely disregard the actual person who's going to use the product. So like, you want to evangelize those people so that, one, if they are a user and that company has their product, they're like deeply invested in it and they like that because of your content. Or two, if they're not a user, they want to become one because your content is so good. And I have an example of this. I wouldn't, in like right now, I wouldn't use this same example because there's companies doing it better now. But at the time, this is something that actually happened with me, so I use it as an example a lot. Probably like 4 or 5 years ago, I was in the market for a project management tool. So like ClickUp, Asana, Monday, like tons of companies in that space. And the use case for me was a very basic use case. Like every single one of them could have been used like interchangeably. It didn't matter.
Yep.
So as I went through like 2 or 3 demos, and every single one of them was the exact same, and price wise, they're all in the same, ish range, I ended up choosing Monday because at the time they had a YouTube series called, crap, it's escaping me now. But they had a YouTube series that was really entertaining. It was called Will It Automate. It was really entertaining. It was really good. And I actually watched it as if I watched like, other channels I enjoyed. Like it was like I'd watch like Sam the Cooking Guy, and then I'd watch, Will It Automate? And because of that, I ended up going with Monday because of that evangelism effect. So like from a purpose standpoint, first and foremost, you got to figure out who you're targeting and what you're trying to accomplish with that person. And brand awareness and creating more demos is a side effect. It's neither one of those things.
Did you feel like you just trusted that company more or liked them more? Like, what do you think psychology-wise was the reason that, you're consuming their shows and stuff, so that's pretty obvious, but what do you think behind the scenes, if you dive into the mind, what do you think's happening as to why you would choose them by watching a show?
I'm just putting a pause in here. You're coming in like really robotic.
I am? Like my sound?
Yeah, like it's like I can hear you, but it's very it's super robotic sounding. I mean, we can keep going, like it's not an issue. I just didn't know if like for the actual recording it would make it if it.
No, it'll be fine. The recording's coming on something different, so it won't matter. At first I was like, I thought you meant my personality. I was like, I am. It's like, dude, you sound like a fucking robot. Like, what are you doing? Stop being a. Is this AI or am I actually being interviewed by Alex here? What's going on?
Oh, that's good. No, I'm not
behind
that
the scenes.
Dick.
That'd be a trick at the end. Be like, Todd, this wasn't even me. This was fucking AI the whole time.
Chat GPT did this interview.
yes. Dang, we'd be out of a job. All right, dude.
Okay.
So sorry, man. If you can deal with it, we'll keep rolling. Because all the other, I got a mic here. I got a mic. Like it's cool.
Here, maybe it's me. Hold on one second.
Question was like, so you started watching this company's, in this case Mondays.com. You started watching their content channel, and that caused you to kind of go with them amongst a lot of other competitors that looked very similar to them. What do you think psychology? I'm curious about the psychology behind this. Like, what do you think it was? Did you just trust them more, like them more? Did they seem more credible? Like a combination of those? What really was it?
Yeah. So honestly, like if I really think about that question and answer that honestly, it has nothing to do with trust, because like let's face it. If you think about this like really logically, like one company to the next, like there's probably not going to be a whole lot of like trust difference if I don't have a personal connection with someone inside that company.
Right.
Now, that being said, that type of content can help build that, what feels like a personal connection. I've never met any of these people. But for me, it was almost like I felt like these were more of like my people, right? Because like I was a content creator. I was invested in YouTube. Like that was my full-time gig. And they were just executing on that really well. And it was really nothing more than that. Like I the same reason like you buy a piece of swag from your favorite creator, or like, get a Mr. Beast burger, or go get his like whatever bar he sells at Walmart now. Like the same reason for you do that on like a B2C side, that actually had an impact on my decision on the B2B side. Because at the end of the day, like all these products that are coming out, there's not a ton of differentiation in them.
Right.
In most cases. Some cases that's not the case. But in most cases, there's not. And it comes down to like that feeling you get, right?
Yes. And I would say honestly, it sounds like they sort of built a relationship with you, related to you, appealed to you. And I would even argue they did build trust with you to a certain extent. You feel like you knew them, you kind of knew how they roll. There were certain similarities. Like that is it. That's what I think video in a lot of ways does. You actually build a relationship with people, with an audience, with your potential customers, without even getting on a call with them first, without even having the sales call, the discovery call. You're building that relationship and trust along the way, even if it's entertaining or edutaining or whatever it might be. That's the process you take people through. And so when they're ready to buy, it's like you're like the only choice, even though there's a sea of options out there potentially.
Absolutely.
So question.
Real quick, I want to touch on that because I 100% agree with you, and I have an example of this. When I was doing all of those calls, like back in February, like essentially like interviewing people, not
Yep.
interviewing them, but like getting a feeling like why they wanted to create content on TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the exact percentage. I used to because I used to track this stuff, but a huge majority, over 50%. First thing they said, or among the first things they said when we would hop on these calls is like, I feel like I already know you. And
Yes.
like, I've 80% of these people, like they booked a meeting on my calendar. I had absolutely no idea who they were.
Yes.
Even within like my comments and stuff. It's not like I had like been going back and forth with them. It was just from watching my videos.
Yep.
So like in that sense, like 100%, like there's no better way to build that, like, I don't know, I'll call it like a faux relationship, like that feeling you get. You feel like you know them. And there's that's a huge advantage when you're going into like a sales process or marketing your brand or whatever.
Big time. It's a complete game changer. And before you even said that, I knew exactly what you're going to say because it happens to me all the time because I create video content, right? So one thing I don't want to skip over, because I feel like the audience may miss this, and it's probably one of the most important things that you just said about how to do great marketing, is you got insights and you collected a ton of data and knowledge and information from the customers, from the audience on the front end. And I feel like that's such a miss by a lot of like marketing strategies. They go out there and they're like, oh, this looks cool, or let's update our website or put out content that we think is cool. Let's have a fancy introduction and our logos and all this stuff. And it's like, that's not what your customers care about. That's not what they're talking about. That's not what they want to consume from you, right? That's not going to build a relationship or trust or any of that stuff. You went right to the source. Before you started like answering that question, you said, let me just figure out how my customers or the users or the consumers of my content, let me just figure out where their head's at. What are they thinking about? And then what you did is the power of that when you come into the marketplace now with your point of view and your perspective and you share your content and your knowledge, well, now it's like they're consuming the video or the content and they're like, shit, I was thinking that same thing. I was wondering that same question. Man, I've been doing this all wrong. Who is this guy? Who is this gal? And so it just creates the buy-in next level, man. So really quickly, yeah, go ahead.
When I was doing that too, like, I think a lot of people, when they say like something like I just said, you know, the majority of people had said this. When I say like data, like when I was on these calls, like I took notes, and they were quick calls. They were 15 to max 30-minute calls. In every single call, I had 3 questions that I asked every single person. It was quick. They would answer those questions, and then we would get into what they wanted to talk about.
Yep.
But I would literally like take the responses to all that, and it was very similar. Like one was, crap, I don't remember off the top of my head. Like, why do you want to get on TikTok? Like, are you currently creating content? What's the purpose? Something like that. And I would just keywords in the same way I knew that 99% of people said brand awareness or request demos is I wrote down all that information. I took it down in a spreadsheet, and then like that's something that I can hold on to. It's not just like in my brain. Like, right. So like when you're collecting this stuff, I'm not a like analyst by any stretch of the imagination, but like as you're gathering this information, like it's important to like figure that stuff out and know what you're working with.
Yep. 100%, man. So let's say you're a B2B company and you're putting out content, maybe it's been a couple months, and you're wondering, how do we measure if our content's working or if we're on the right track, or what should success look like? What would you advise those companies?
I think the first thing that you have to do is you got to get self-reported attribution set up. So for those that don't know, it's essentially fancy term for how did you hear about us on your website. Yes.
And where would you set that up at? Website, where else?
The only place that, and this is not really, this is straight from Refined Labs, so I'm not going to pretend like this is my advice, but they've done testing on it. And the only place that you set that up is on your high intent conversion form. So like request a demo. For us at the time, it was request a consultation, like those type of high intent forms that you're not driving traffic to through ads.
So for the non-fancy folks, that could be a Calendly link to book a call with you, and you're asking, where did you discover us? Which is something that we do too. Which, you book the call on the website, or you fill out a form, or you ask for the consultation, and then you're talking to you about somebody that's high intent, that they're very interested in potentially working with you at that point, right? You don't want to ask it too early on, because
they've come inbound. They want to get more information. How did you hear about us? Exactly. And typically, like that's a open text required field. So the reason for that is like they'll give you way more information, and we used to pipe this into Slack automatically. I love that, so like you would see like the information, and it might be like, I saw a video from the CEO, and then I also saw you come up in like the Exit 5 community, and like they would go into detail in like their journey. So it gives you a lot of insights, and then you can bucket those things, just like I said before. Like you take those keywords and you can bucket them into certain things for like reporting.
Okay, so you start there, you get the attribution, right? You understand where people are coming from, because if you do all this content, and then I always tell people, if you have no way to track it and you're not getting data on where people are coming from, you're never gonna. It could be working tremendously well and you don't know it, or it could not be, but either way you don't know it. So we got that down. Where do we go next now?
And this may actually be like, I take that back. This isn't prior, but this is kind of something different. Like as the content is going out, and to be honest with you, this is the most important thing to look at in like the sense of a creator and the person that's putting out the content. This is the most important. The self-report attribution comes in when you have to like prove that effectiveness to your higher ups.
Right.
But the most impactful thing to me, and this is going to sound like really like elementary, but there's no need to overcomplicate it, is when you're actually putting out content, what is the response? Like, are people engaging with it? Are they sharing with it? So like some of the things that I look at from like a like short term to a longer term window is like in the very short term, like, am I getting comments and or likes from people inside of my target audience? So like if I'm trying to reach CMOs, are CMOs liking and commenting on my post? That's like number one. That might go for a while. Number two is like, for me, am I getting invited onto things like this? Like, do people view me as having valuable enough insights that they want to share them with their audience?
That's a good one.
That's number two. Number three, which was a huge unlock for me, is specifically on LinkedIn, but this goes across channels. I used to run into this on YouTube as well. Are people that I don't know mentioning me on other people's content?
Yes.
Like, hey, someone puts out a post, and then in the comments I'll get tagged from someone I've never seen in my life.
Yes.
And they're like, Todd might be able to weigh in on this. He's good at XYZ.
Yes.
That's another. So like
a random champion. A random champion. It's like, man, that's the power of content. People are talking about you behind your back, which normally is not a good thing, but it is a good thing in this case.
Yeah, and I think that's like in your own, everybody talks about like, this is across everything. Like people say like build a media brand. People say, create good content. People say build diehard fans. But like, what do you mean by building diehard fans? And how do you do that? And the answer to that is like, one, you just start with activities. You have to figure out what works. And as you start doing that, you start looking at these qualitative signals, but it's not just what's happening in your own comment section. Mm-hmm. Like a diehard fan is not just simply going to comment on your videos or like your videos. A diehard fan is someone who's going to go out there and be like your like you said, your champion behind the scenes. And when I was doing YouTube, this got so intense that people would actually become, I call them the bouncers of our content, or the bouncers of our comments, because like one of the things that we did was every time something, not every time, but like 99% of the content that we created was in direct response to somebody asking a question. And this is long form content. So this is like 8 to 15 minute content on YouTube. And a lot of that stuff got repetitive, but there was always like these little nuances in the way that they asked their question. So anyway, a lot of times we would answer a question, and in that industry, it was the welding industry, like similar to B2B, there's 100 ways to skin a cat. Like you can do this, you can accomplish this goal in many different ways. And we would answer the question with like, in our mind, what was the best way. And we would get people like, as you can imagine, YouTube, like trolls being like, you know, and this is an actual real comment. Someone would be like, if you tried to do that at my shop, you'd leave after day one with a size 10 boot up your ass. And like, so like those types of comments would come in. Yeah. But the fact that like we were essentially training everybody by creating content specifically for them, training them that like, hey, we're here to help you. Yeah. We would have like 50 people that commented on everything that we did, and then they would literally wait for those comments. And then they would shut that stuff down so fast, like, no, like I do this in my job and, you know, works every time, blah, 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 blah. So like, that's what a diehard fan is. And that's the, getting back to the original question, that's one of those qualitative things that you have to look for. Is like, am I building that?
So let's say, because I know there's some businesses and some owners, founders out there listening right now, like, all right, well, when do the opportunities really start coming in? When do I win customers, the inbound leads, and like how long should you give it before you're like, hey, at this point, you should be starting to see some inbounds. I know it can depend. And then if you're not, what should you do?
I'm going to reverse this on you, but I'll give you a response first, and then I'll reverse it on you because you probably have like your own insights and what it took for you. Again, I'm going to throw the answer everyone hates out there and says it depends. But that means it depends on a lot of things. You know, sure. If I'm selling a, you know, PLG product that costs me $50 a month, that's going to be a whole lot different than if I'm selling something that costs me $100,000 a year.
Let's say it's, for this case, let's say it's a B2B company and every customer is worth 30 to hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's a bigger ticket.
If it's bigger ticket, it's obviously going to take longer, but it's still at a point where, like, I'm going to answer it like this. The longest part, the most difficult part is creating something and getting those insights that it's working up front. So like, if I'm creating content and after 60 days, I'm not seeing those initial qualitative signals, like I may not be closing $40,000 deals in 60 days, but if I'm not seeing those initial qualitative things that I just mentioned, that's probably when I'm going to try to do something else.
Yep.
How long that actually takes, it's going to vary. Like if I say, if you don't see a deal come in 90 days, like you need to stop creating content. Like, I don't want to say that because, you know, some companies it might take 6 months, some companies it might take 30 days. But I think the thing that you have to figure out is it shouldn't take you longer than 60 days to get those qualitative insights. Mm-hmm. Like if you're putting out regular content and after 60 days, like you're not seeing that you're getting the engagement from your target and like going on podcasts and people like starting to talk about it, that's a sign that you probably want to shift.
And if you're going to shift, you know, would you recommend that people, because my thought process is go like, how good is your insights and your knowledge of the customer, what they care about, their pain points, all that stuff, and your perspective on top of that. But do you recommend people going back to the source at that point, potentially?
I think the source has to be, when you say source, you mean like the customer or like? Yeah,
like just you're to the drawing board of like, what are we, like the purpose of the content? Like what perspective are we trying to, you know, shift here? What's the mindset? And then, obviously that's based off customer insights and data and stuff. Like, do you go back to that place and say, are we even talking about the right shit? Like, are we even aligned here?
Yeah, I think this is where, so not necessarily the purpose, because I kind of, purpose is very high level. It's like who you're targeting, what you want them to do within their company. Mm-hmm. That's how I look at purpose. I think you come down the line a little bit, and this is where like your strategy comes in. So like, one, is my overall strategic narrative something that resonates with people? If they're not responding to it, the answer is probably no. So like, do I need to create like more stronger points of view that kind of like lead up to my overall narrative and the content that goes under each of that? Maybe that's something I need to come back to. But like, again, the purpose is more, in my head at least, the purpose is more like, who am I trying to get to consume this, and what is the action I'm trying to get them to take?
Assuming they already have that down, right? I think a lot of people potentially listening right now are gonna like, well, let me go back there first. But I agree. Assuming you've got that framework down, like the purpose and that type of stuff, then it's like, to me it's strategy or it's tactical, right? Like it's either strategy, a little bit in the cloud, or it's like tactically, like your first few seconds are just not hooking people in. What you're saying is good, but you're not tactically addressing this the right way.
Yeah, my consulting colleague Obed and I call this the realm of relevancy. So essentially, like, if you think about it like kind of like a pyramid, like a chart, mm-hmm. You've got your strategic narrative at the top.
Yep.
Underneath that, you have a few POVs. So if I look at those POVs, without even seeing the narrative, I should be able to understand what that narrative is going to be.
Exactly.
But then underneath of those point of views, you're going to have these like topics that we call them sparks because they spark conversation. Yep. So typically, like, this can be like X is better than Y, or old way versus new way, like stuff yep. like that. And then under all of that, that's where all your subject matter is going to come into play. So this are like individual posts and things you talk about. Mm-hmm. And then from all of that, you're going to get those audience signals that kind of gives you that infinite amount of content that you can create. If you're not getting those audience signals, it's a signal to you that POV and the subject matter that you're creating underneath it don't resonate. So there
you go, folks.